Hey folks, Sean here, and today I want to talk to you more about naming and branding for your B2B SaaS. And I'm going to pick on a particular popular company, and that company is the media company HBO. Now, if you're unaware, HBO's access to its content has become more and more popular to be accessed through essentially their mobile application because there's a lot of traffic coming from mobile these days. But the app itself gets used in other instances as well too, like smart TVs. For example, the one that I have, which is actually not quite a smart TV because I have a TV that's almost like 15 years old, but it still works pretty well, believe it or not. However, I've added a Roku device to that TV, which is a cheap kind of media device plugin, which can kind of make a TV that has an HDMI port and can support that device somewhat smarter. But on the Roku, you can run apps like Netflix app, Hulu app, whatever, which also used to include my HBO application. Now, I was basically given the service, HBO. I wasn't paying for it separately myself, but I was using it because they produce some great content. And over the years, HBO's had pretty incredible shows in several instances. So I was leveraging it because it was bundled together with my cell phone service. I'd probably rather my cell phone service just be cheaper, but regardless, I guess you take what you can get. So anyway, I had access to HBO and I was using it. In order to access it through my TV and the Roku, I installed the HBO application on the Roku, which was accessible from my TV. And that's how I would watch. I would just fire up the TV. I would always use the Roku. I don't have cable these days. I'm a millennial, but I'm an elder millennial. But regardless, I'm embracing those concepts. So I haven't had cable TV in a long time. And I really don't miss it. And I didn't typically watch a whole lot of stuff live. And even when I did, I'd watch with other people. So I didn't really need that. However, most of the content I would watch would be via one of the streaming services, like Netflix, Hulu occasionally, and then I was now using HBO. So I was using it, and I think we were watching a show in particular, maybe it was Succession or something like that, one of the HBO shows, and I went through to fire up like the latest episode, which had they were releasing them on late Sunday. Of course, my elder, being elder at this point, I was going to bed a little bit earlier, so I wasn't really catching that in real time. Instead, I would watch it the next day with my wife, and when I went to go fire up the application, I couldn't find it. It wasn't on the Roku any longer, so I really wondered, like, what's going on here? Did it get uninstalled or removed, or did I lose access to the service or something like that? So as it turns out, I didn't lose access to the service, but the application itself was rebranded. Only I didn't know that because that information hadn't made its way to me. So, long story short here, what HBO did was over a series of years, it seems, they changed the name several times from just HBO, and I think I've got this order correct, to HBO Now, to then again HBO Max, to what it is now, and that it's just Max, as in the element that is HBO, which I think is pretty commonly known and understood, has been removed altogether from the application, and the application itself now just says Max on it, which I interpreted to be a completely different service. Uh, Back in the day, that was affiliated with a competitor of HBO, so that made it even more confusing to me, or at least so I thought. So the story here and the point that I'm trying to make is that HBO changed their name away from what was the only element about it that I knew. And because of that, it made it that much more difficult for me to actually have the same type of consistent experience to the point where I thought the application had been removed entirely, but it was actually just rebranded. And I wasn't able to find it again until I did the digging to find out that they had changed their name to actually remove HBO from it, which I never would have thought they would have done. So I've talked a bit about on this podcast how I'm a much bigger fan of thematic naming, in that whatever your product does, I love it when what it does is in the name, because it makes it that much easier to market your product and for people to understand what it does. But in this instance, what HBO did is they made it a lot harder for me to understand what it was that they did and actually almost made it to the point where I wasn't really going to search for it any longer. I was going to go get what I needed via a completely different method. So the story and the lesson here, I think, is be careful with your naming. especially as you're changing or updating it, because you could create a real mess, and HBO seems to have done that. The branding and positioning experts out there, if you do some Googling on this topic, you'll find a bunch of articles just like lambasting them and tearing them apart, which I think is totally fair. Because I think this is a real boneheaded move, in my opinion. Now, I'm no branding or marketing expert, but I have had to do those things for my own B2B SaaS applications, and I've helped others with them as well too. And I don't know about you, but if it's going to be harder for people to find it, I see that as a bad thing. I don't really think it needs to get a whole lot more complicated than that. So, lesson learned, be careful with your naming because if you make a potential boneheaded move like that, you can cause a lot more harm than you may have been expecting to.